Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's good to see familiar faces, fun to see new faces. We love it. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're going to make sure we give people a chance to hop in. All right, I'm going to start with just some quick introductions. So you have the pleasure of being led today in this session by Lesley Doane. So Leslie's going to wave and maybe say hi so her name pops up.
Hello.
Lesley is a first grade teacher at Barbara Morgan Elementary School in McCall, Idaho. She's been there teaching first grade for about 11 years, and she is one of our Rockstar Idaho Coaching Network teachers. She did our cohort program in the second year and has been a returning teacher ever since, which is amazing. She's been a rock for us, and so we're really excited to be able to have her present for you today. So with that, I'm going to give it to Lesley and let her take us away.
All right. Well, a big thank you to Emily for being here and supporting me. And she is going to master all of the screen sharing and everything that you'll see digitally. So I greatly appreciate it. I'm sure you're going to see these reminders all through the day for the session, but just a quick review. Having your microphone on mute when not speaking. A smile if you choose to be on camera because we're recording your session. Hopefully everyone's web access will be up and running today. Your first and last name as your screen name is helpful. You'll need a place to create, whether you want to do it digitally or writing by hand. And as always, we invite you here today with an open mind and heart. So if you're at all familiar with the Idaho Coaching Network, we love our norms. So these are some ideas to keep at the forefront of your mind today. We'll have a positive, safe, collaborative working environment, presuming positive intent, be present in the process, listen actively and attentively. And as always, I'm sure you are already awesome and just prepared to be more awesome today. We have three main learning goals that we'll look at this morning. We're going to identify the power of narrative in the classroom. We're going to take time to really explore that role of narrative to engage all of our students across the disciplines. And we're going to unlock narrative as a potential healing tool that just might change a life forever. Also, we have two guiding questions to keep in mind. Looking at what is the power of narrative and in reading and writing in all subjects throughout the school year, and to what extent can we use narrative to engage our readers and writers? So we're going to jump right in with some introductions. So if you have access to the chat, and you could put your name, where you're from, what you do, and just a brief story or an anecdote of something that made you laugh recently. And as you're posting, sometimes that chat can go pretty quick, but keep an eye on the names that are popping up and feel free to unmute yourself and give a shout out or a celebration to someone you know or a connection you might see. And we'll just take about a minute to introduce ourselves via the chat. And it's great to see so far such a variety of contents represented, age levels, different parts across the state. Looks like we have everything from kindergarten on up. Carolyn had a school-wide bubble party yesterday. Oh, yes, Idaho legislators, they cause a different kind of laughter, Gregory. So we'll just give maybe about 30 more seconds to have a chance to share in the chat and peruse what other people are posting. All right, if you want to bring the chat to a close, we're going to move on to some writing into the day. So you will want that creative space available to share some thoughts this morning. I'd like you to think about narrative in the classroom and take time to describe all the ways that you currently use narrative within your context. And if you feel that narrative is something very new to you, just feel free to reflect on how it might be present in any way in what you do, either through reading or writing. And we will return to this piece of writing a little bit later in the session, so have it close by. And we'll take about 2 minutes and see where we're at with some writing into the day. So we're about 30 seconds out. Now, there's never quite enough time to write all the things, but if you want to take 30 more seconds to jot down your last thoughts or complete that sentence you're in the middle of writing. Okay, we're going to ask that you bring your writing into the day to a close. And we're going to make a bit of a shift to explore that idea of our own narrative and how we might change it. thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you all have sound right now? No sound. Okay.
Oh my gosh, guys.
Well, thanks for letting us know. We'll get that.
All right, give me just a second. Let's try this again.
How do I know? When they think of the phrase, I don't know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I see.
Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose. Now, how do I know? A lot of people.
Thank you, Emily. No matter how many times I've seen this video, I feel like it always needs to just kind of sit for a few seconds and sink in. That idea that when you know your why, your what will have a bigger impact. And as educators, we're so dialed in to the what and the how, but maybe not often really sitting down to have a deep reflection on the why of what we do. So we're going to dive into some rules of notice. In the resource folder, and Emily can put a link in the chat if you need to access that again, there is a document titled Rules of Notice. And if you could open and pull that up, we're only going to look at the first text excerpt at the top of page 1. So you're going to read this text excerpt. You're going to write down any notices or wonders, questions. Then I'd like you to identify what mode of writing you would classify it as. And then finally, where you might find a text such as this. So again, notices, wonders, what you would classify it as, and where you might find this type of writing, just in your own creative space. And check in about a minute and a half to see where we are before we go to the second page, part 2. So we're looking at another 30, 45 seconds. Again, I know it's not quite enough time to get your writing down. If you absolutely need more time collectively as a group, give me a thumbs up or a post in the chat and we'll squeeze a little bit more out for part 1. Okay, so we're gonna bring part 2 to a close then and have you take a look at part 2. So same process, you're gonna read the text excerpt at the top of page 2. Again, classify what mode of writing you might name it, where you would find a type of text such as this. And lastly, this time you're gonna compare the two. So just make a quick comparison between part 1 and part 2. We are moving into a breakout after this. So as you're writing, you might be reflecting on something you'd like to share out with the group when you get a chance to mix and mingle. So we'll give about another 2 minutes for this section. We'll do about another 30 seconds and close up rules and notice part 2. All right, so we're going to close out our thoughts and get ready to do some sharing in a group. And as Emily magically zooms you away to a session, just maybe have someone in your group a bit mindful of the time, as it does tend to go quickly when we're all sharing, so that everyone that would like to talk does have an opportunity. And I'd like you to focus on the rules of notice 1 and 2, anything that you'd like to share out. And then we will return the whole group, and we're going to continue that idea of what narrative is.
It didn't go anywhere. Is this the group I'm in?
I was wondering the same thing. I don't know.
Yes. Thanks. We're going to keep one group here in the main room for 1,000 reasons, but this is your group.
And welcome,
Perfect.
everyone. I'm just going to kind of hang in the background and let you 3 do some dialoguing today.
Well, my
Awesome.
my first wonders were if that passage couldn't have been written a little bit more engaging, because it was written as such a cold, hard, informational text. And then the second one kind of did capture that with the descriptive language that was used to tell you the same. I mean, it's the same subject, but a lot more information that would take the reader in.
Yeah, the difference between a textbook or journal article versus almost something like you'd read in Atlantic magazine, or I think it's called Popular Science. I think that, I'm not sure, that like a trade book.
I was automatically kind of drawn to like, what is engaging me? And when things are really technical, I can find my mind wandering if I don't have, something to attach those ideas to. And like, I'm reading it again. And like, did I get it? Is that what it's saying? So the first one very much felt that way. Whereas the second one, I didn't feel my mind wandering. It felt really easy to dig in and engage with it and wonder about like, where's the next paragraph? Because I'd like to read more about it. When you guys were thinking about like how you would characterize, like how you would name the type of writing, I heard you say, Sarah, you're talking about like the second one sounded a lot more like a magazine article. And Teresa, I felt like you said something about how the first one sounded to you.
Yeah, the first one sounded like a textbook, like cold, hard facts. We're just going to give you the basic information as quickly as we can with no fluff.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, going back to what you said, Emily, before that. I think it depends on my purpose for reading something. If I'm reading for enjoyment, I prefer the second type. But if I'm actually trying to learn something, I found myself being irritated by the second one, because I was like, I just want the information. I don't need like the narrative to go along with it. I think so. It just depends, I guess, on your purpose and what kind of type of learner maybe you are.
Yeah, I think both of those do seem important, because if I were doing some sort of a report and I just needed the facts and information, I would definitely want that faster, right? I'd want to read an informational text that had the statistics or whatever the information is, so I could share that out. Yeah, if I'm reading and wanting to connect, I want the second one. I like that thinking though, especially when we're thinking of our students, like what purpose are we giving them, and are we choosing the right text for the right purpose, or helping them choose the right text for the right purpose?
Mm-hmm.
I think Sarah kind of captured, it depends on what kind of a learner you are, because for me, the second one kind of paints a picture of what's happening, and that makes it easier for me to learn. So I got the gist of the first one, but the second one, you kind of understand. I don't know, like, cancer's aggressive, but the way they described it was, I mean, it put it in context in my mind. It was easier for me to be engaged with the second one for sure.
And I can think of examples of kids where that's true too. Some of them might, you see nonfiction text written almost in like a comic book form, with more of a narrative. And some kids are really drawn to that. When I think of my own sons, that would totally irritate them. They want like the textbook version for a first grader. So, I mean.
I love that. Picturing them like, no, we want the real thing. But I think that goes back to, I think you said that earlier, like if every learner is different, how are we making sure that everyone gets what they need? And maybe we need it in multiple forms to make sure that everyone has the chance to engage.
Absolutely. Which then you have to either have a really broad knowledge of what is out there or have great resources and librarians to help you.
Yes. I'm going with the teacher librarian route as a very helpful resource. Awesome. All right. People are starting to come back. Thanks for being in my group with me.
All right, I think we got people heading on back. So we are going to jump into a rapid fire brainstorm using Padlet. So there will be a link in the chat to access this program. If you're unfamiliar with Padlet, at the bottom right hand of your screen, there's a white plus symbol and a pink circle. That's what you will be clicking on to type in your comment, and then it'll just stay on the screen. And this is rapid fire, so don't take a lot of time to think. You're gonna respond to the question, what is narrative? You can type as many comments as you like. Try to take a peek at what's coming up on the screen. And we'll do this for maybe 30 seconds. Go whenever you're ready. Gonna give you 10 more seconds. Get those words out quick. All right, we are closing the posting. Rapid fire, goes quick. So we're going to shift back to see what the Idaho content standards actually tell us narrative is. So I'm not going to read these out loud, but I'm going to give you some time just to refresh your brain, unless you have these memorized, of how the Idaho content standards clearly define what narrative is. All right, just kind of a quick refresh. We're going to continue to look at those elements of really good fiction and really good nonfiction, which is that blend of narrative. So a narrative is going to incorporate the elements of fiction. You'll have your plot, which could include that problem, a character's trouble, a question they're seeking an answer to, or just a series of development. You'll have interesting characters entering into this story world or a specific setting. And most often you will have a filter or a slant that's going to unveil a perspective or a bias. So when we rely on stories, we are accused of being anecdotal, not serious. We are told that on the job and in college, we do the hard stuff, the rigorous stuff. We analyze and make logical arguments. We don't tell stories. So going back, why teach narrative? Because there are standards for literacy in the disciplines. All teachers in all content areas are going to be part of the same enterprise of creating literate students, students who will know how to read, write, and think like a democratic citizen, scientist, historian. So in a sense, we are this global community, K-12, all working together to enhance the processes of students as they're reading and writing and thinking. And we ask ourselves when teaching narrative, what is going to be memorable? What will offer students a different way to engage? And what is it that's going to grab their attention? So we're going to begin diving into those specific content standards for a bit. And if you could either post in the chat or a quick reaction, if social sciences fit your field of teaching right now. So if this relates to you in any way. Okay. We're going to go ahead and look at the social sciences because history is never told without a filter and a slant. In short, students need to be able to tell the stories of others, both accurately and evocatively, both in and out of school, because it helps them understand how others see the world, which in turn provides that opportunity for students to extend, refine, or challenge the way they understand themselves. We need to plan instruction that invites students to discover and understand the way others make sense of their lives. So I'm going to invite you to read about Stubby. In the chat, there will be a link to take you to an article. And if you could read as much as you can about who our character is in narrative, and then we will return whole group. I realize it may not be enough time to read through all of this, but if we can read for about another 30 seconds, I hope you can return to this a bit later and finish up if you need to. All right, so here we have Stubby, who is just, he's this stray dog who's adopted by American soldiers and he's smuggled across the front lines. So this is just an example of using narrative to create something for your students to make sense of those complex times in history, something to be engaging and memorable, something that's going to grab their attention. So what about on the flip end when you're dealing with young learners? What can we use that will be powerful means of bringing a narrative into the classroom? So these two texts I've used with my first grade students, so 6 and 7-year-olds. We have Freedom in Congo Square, which is a poetic nonfiction text, and Henry's Freedom Box, which is about a slave who literally mails himself to freedom in the North. And Henry's Freedom Box begins telling the story of a little boy born into slavery. So we're taking two types of text and introducing students to some pretty big ideas to grapple with, told through narrative. And it's brought about a lot of deep discussion, questions, curiosity, grappling, puzzlement, as they're really trying to make sense of how others understand their lives and how they understand the connection between themselves and these characters in the books. So we're gonna switch around to science. So again, give me a reaction, or if you can type something in the chat to let me know if science fits your field of expertise. Because after all, isn't science about motion, introducing perplexity, sorting through answers, maybe a character's quest? For example, if we are teaching science, how about the appeal of Miss Frizzle's bus? So if you're unfamiliar with Miss Frizzle, she is our beloved character in the Magic School Bus series of books and videos. And she takes students on little field trips through the human heart or the Great Barrier Reef or reptiles. And it helps kids kind of understand deeper scientific content and expose them to some pretty great vocabulary. And we can't forget Eric Carle, one of our most well-known and beloved children's authors. And his romance of information he uses in The Hermit Crab or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. So in The Hermit Crab, you're looking at animal adaptations. Very Hungry Caterpillar, think about the life cycle. Just using picture books in general with any audience. You have medical detectives, embedding scientific knowledge within a narrative. And lastly, telling stories of the very people who are affected. The weeks and months in that state of comatose damaged my brain. Amnesia is the medical term, but what it feels like is that the files that held my memories from the last decade were corrupted. They melted into a muddy mess. Time passes, different in that space between. The lives I lived there were full of demons and cruelty and undignified, demoralizing, crushing humanity. This is just a little snippet of a very raw narrative told by an ultra runner, Tommy Rivers. He's a sponsored athlete who's run hundreds of miles all across the world up the most challenging mountain terrain and was diagnosed with a rare form of lung cancer last year. So he tells his story and how powerful and memorable to learn a bit more about what cancer really does to one's body, the treatments, the progression, and medical technology. Just hearing someone who's one heck of a runner and a really beautiful human being share his narrative with the world. So you do have this ROC PDF in the file of resources if you'd like to pull it up. Otherwise, I'm going to read it aloud, and I just want you to listen and think about what other content you might slide into the place of the subject of this poem. Shh. Do you hear something? No, not that. Lean in closer. No, closer. Now listen again. Can you hear it now? Hear what, you say? The stories all around you. The stories in the rocks. Stones have stories. Exciting tales about fire, floods, and exploding mountains. Sagas of dire, frightening creatures. Some bigger than anything alive today. And of course, epic stories. Stories about time and life and death. Just as one might expect, every stone wants to be heard. Oh yes, they're all selfish storytellers. Some have been waiting hundreds of millions of years to speak, some even longer. All they need is a captive audience. That's you. Can you hear them? Well, let's be honest, you can't really hear the stories by putting your ear near the rocks, but you can learn to listen in other ways. An experienced geologist can tell you a lot about most any rock just by looking at it. You can too. Open your eyes, look around, learn to listen differently. You might just hear the whispers. So just think about the different animate or inanimate subjects you could slide into that poem in place of rocks to teach your students something in the sciences. As poetry could be your form of powerful narrative. So quickly, I just included a specific strategy of narrative that you could use in your classroom. You have the tableau, which is a dramatic or artistic approach to retelling a story. It's a series of frozen pictures that would bring something to life. So in essence, your students would be creating a living picture or a sculpture that can recreate those scenes or stories or events from history, literature, art, even math and science. Because students need to compose with both words and images, because it is how we all make meaning. So we're going to take another shift and examine narrative from a bit of a different perspective in looking at healing through narrative. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. So I wanted to share a little mini narrative that one of my students wrote and a bit of a background. He came to me in October and he didn't say anything except to tell me that I hadn't moved my arrow in my visual schedule. It's the only thing he'd say to me all day. He'd come up and, Mrs. Doane, the arrow's still on reading. Or Mrs. Doane, you need to move the arrow to math. Okay, thanks. And then our class did our first big writing unit of the year, and we were writing fables and trying to play around a little bit with incorporating a moral or a lesson of a story. And I read a lot of Mandalorians fighting SpongeBob characters, and the kids were writing about their friends in class. And then this story came to me. My mom is real nice. She went to heaven. It happened last year. We lived in Washington. Cancer is not nice. My mom taught at school. I miss my mom. So this story just completely opened our eyes and hearts to this little boy. We had no idea the burden he was shouldering until he had this opportunity to write a narrative. And he wasn't thinking about a fable in a sense of the technical terms of writing a narrative. He wrote that untold story inside of him that he needed to share. And since then, he's slowly come out of his shell. He's written about his mom a few more times. He's shared about her. We've been able to get him the support that he needs. But it makes us wonder, what are the untold stories that are within your classroom walls? We try for this coherence because incoherence is terrifying. We need those stories, not simply for aesthetic pleasure, but to reassure ourselves that we live in a comprehensible world. because we do have literary minds. And those students need to be able to ask questions to try and make sense of the traumatic events in their personal lives and of those that are taking place in their world. And remember, they're trying to understand how others see the world and challenge the way they understand themselves. Now you are going to try a little bit of writing. We're going to move in to some writing out of the day. You'll want to refer back to what you shared earlier this morning, remembering that when you know your why, your what has a bigger impact. So just reflect to what we shared earlier when you were describing all the ways you use narrative. And now I want you to reflect on if there are any ways you're using narrative that you hadn't yet named before. Maybe there's something you're doing in reading and writing across the disciplines you wouldn't have identified as narrative previously. So think about naming the ways you're using narrative you hadn't considered before, if there's any new possibilities that have come to light this morning, or if there's something that you'd like to try next, an idea that you might have. And we'll give you probably about 3 or 4 minutes just to spend some time on your own and reflect and share. And you're welcome to turn off your camera if you need some think private time. And then we will be moving into a breakout room to wrap up our session together today. So you might be thinking about something you'd like to share out with your group. So we'll take about another minute to just share some of our ideas before we move to a break. All right, wrap up your last thought or that idea. And then Emily, again, with her talents, is going to send you off to a breakout room, and you'll have about 5 minutes again. And I encourage you to share anything from today that struck a chord that you'd like to with your group, or if there's further questions or wonders you want to pose or throw out there to the people you are chatting with today.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, and again, I'm just going to kind of step back into the background and let you all have your discussion today. I'm the wallpaper.
Thanks, Leslie. Who wants to go first?
I could use it more, I guess. I've been thinking about how I could creatively use it because we found in our school that our kids can't write. I mean, I hate to say it bluntly like that, but the quality of work that we get is horrible. And I teach fifth, sixth. We have a writing elective that they get writing instruction in. We have our ELA classes. I try to teach it in my home room. I have a visual presentation class where I also have writing, and they're just not getting it. So anyway, I'm seeing ways that maybe I could interject more narrative into my social studies.
I like that, Teresa. Robert, do you want to go next? Oh, I think you're muted. Oh, try one more time. I think you like click it and click it again, and then it there. Okay, hold.
I think narrative, especially kind of in what I teach, would be crucial for picking up details and elements and remembering those in the future after you leave the classroom. So I really like storytelling and long-term retention.
Thank you. Sarah, what were you thinking?
Just based on what I'm hearing people say, I'm also reflecting on being a student and a teacher. I actually think narrative is difficult to write. And I was just wondering if, especially for elementary kids, I remember being frustrated by this. Storytelling verbally is one thing, but then capturing that in your writing, there can be so many barriers to that. I'm just wondering how to support students in that.
Yeah. Well, I like though that you share that idea of verbal storytelling, because we do have speaking and listening standards, and part of that is, being able to express yourself. And when they're telling those stories, I think that gets students really excited, especially as a first step. I know when I'm in elementary classes and there's like okay, turn and talk with your neighbor, and like you can just feel the whole energy in the room, like everybody gets really excited and they have all these things to share. So yeah, then you're thinking like, okay, so how do I tap into the transfer of what's happening verbally into that writing? And it's tricky, but I bet there's some really cool things that you can do to help students move to that section. Or like, can we write the words we hear our partners say, or can we retell the story that we heard, so we're hearing it more than once? I was thinking, so I was just doing some planning with a colleague, and we have to plan like an ending to our year, which is always really hard to think about those endings. And so as we considered, we were like, how do we do this? Like, what's a good place to anchor it? And we were like, we need to hear those stories, but we also need to do it in a way that is structured. And we need to do it in a way that feels safe and accessible for everyone. So we decided to do, we really like, there's a Where I'm From poem that we've used before, and it creates a nice like frame for writing. So they can do a copy change of the poem that gives them space to like have a beautiful structure, but then they get to fill in the personal details. So they have the opportunity to share that story, but not have to come up with all the structure of it. So I'm wondering, even with your littles, if those sentence stems and those structures help to build the ability to do the writing. Lots to think about. All right, thanks for sharing, everyone. People will be coming back shortly.
All right, I think we have people flowing back in. So we know that composing narratives can be a doorway toward possibility and change, toward transformation and justice, toward awareness and empowerment. Composing narratives can lead to hope. There is nothing that our own students seem to want more for themselves. There is nothing that our world needs more. It's worth working and teaching and storytelling for. So again, we're asking all the time, what will be memorable? What will offer students a different way to engage? And what is it that's going to grab their attention? So returning to our learning goals today, I'm hoping that we were able to tap into these a bit, to identify the power that narrative can play in the classroom, to explore the role of narrative, to engage all students across the disciplines, and to look at narrative as a healing tool that could change a life forever. We are going to close with another example of narrative as storytelling, because narrative is not just found in books and written pieces.
I still recall the question that was asked, what are you most ashamed of in your life? And there was this one particular Black gang member, and he began to tell his story. And he said, I'm most ashamed of the fact that I abandoned my family for my homies. I thought to myself, that's kind of deep. And then he leaned forward, and I could see the tears beginning to well up in his eyes. And he said, I left my children out there on the streets without their father. And he began to weep like a man that was broken. Norman's willingness to be vulnerable had challenged all of my misconceptions about what it was to be a Black man and to just be a man in general. This reality made me realize that I no longer needed to live in the fear of what stereotypes and assumptions others may have had, that I could be free to develop my own identity, to figure out who I wanted to be. As I continued to hear the stories of others, men and women who came from various walks in life, I would continue to be transformed by the power of story. And this is why I can stand here today and tell you some of the more intimate details of my life. It's why I believe that there's nothing greater than just serving one another, finding a way to help. And finally, this is why I believe that you should all tell your story. I believe that you should tell what you can, when you can, however you can, because you never know. You may change somebody's life. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know we've looked at different types of narrative as text and examples of what we hear and see. And I do realize that the art of actually putting thoughts to paper is really challenging, no matter if a student's in kindergarten or 12th grade or higher. But remember, sometimes it's just getting down whatever you can, however you can. This story my student wrote is 4 or 5 sentences, which to some may not be classified as a narrative, but this is his story that he got down on paper. And I do wish we had so much more time today to dive deeper into narrative. My husband asked me how much time I had to present, and I said, well, 70 minutes, 75. And he said, that's plenty of time. I was like, is it though? There's so much to cover. So in closing, in that resource folder for today's session, I did include some slides on math. So using narrative in math, it is probably maybe the most challenged content discipline to look at incorporating narrative into, but there are some examples of strategies, text, and a research experiment of sorts looking at the fastest people in the world, if it piques your interest. Also included are specific strategies and examples that you could use with your students to kind of get that writing down onto paper. So if you're pumped and Monday morning, you want to come into your building and start with narrative, there is examples on metaphors, reflection, poetry. So feel free to peruse and use any of those documents provided. I included a lot of quotes in today's session. So we have Minds Made for Stories, which is a bit of a deeper read by Newkirk if you're looking for something to really push your thinking. And so what's the story? And this one's more applicable to some kind of best practices and things you could do with independently in your class, or if you want to chat with your colleagues. And my hope today is that you were just maybe able to leave with a newfound curiosity on what narrative is and where you could take it beyond what is so clearly defined in the content standards, or maybe you have a new idea or two that you would like to bring back to your school communities. So thank you for your posts. I try to keep up with those in the chat and just being awesome today and sharing with all of us today. And thank you, Emily, of course, for all of this, sharing the screen and all the help. I really appreciate her support.
You made my job easy. Normally, if we were in person, we would give Lesley a big hand because we want to celebrate together. So we can do sign language. Cheers for Lesley. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your vulnerability and your heart with us. That was a really lovely session, and I'm sure everybody is leaving with a lot to think over and hopefully some new plans coming up in the coming weeks as they end their school year. I just have a couple of quick reminders for you before I send you off to enjoy your lunch. You have a significant lunch break, so hopefully that gives you a chance to step away from a screen for a little bit, let your eyes rest, maybe move your body a little bit. That always seems important after we've been sitting for so long. Your third session will start at 12:45. So just a reminder to try to hop on about 5 minutes early so your presenter can get everything situated before they get started and they know who's in the who's in the room with them. And we hope you've had a great experience so far, and I hope you're looking forward to your upcoming sessions. So have a lovely lunch break, eat something delicious, and maybe I'll see you in some upcoming sessions. Thanks, everyone.